Today is September 25th, and all of a sudden I have a craving for a new single player game. I haven't played one in a long time. I was like, you know what? Playing a game by yourself is a fun time. So I was scrolling Twitter. All of a sudden, my good pal Blink has a tweet that says, "Hey, this game looks pretty cool and it's dropping tomorrow. It's called Flowstone Saga on Steam." So I wishlisted it and I bought it 3 days later on September 28th. For me, the game was kind of a mixed bag. The story and the characters, for the most part, were kind of lacking, but there were definitely some charming points for me. But what I really liked about the game in particular were the mechanics. The 12 wide board reminded me of the great, beautiful game known as Tetrinet. Wow, that's beautiful. And the different classes and perks were very exciting to explore, as well as the different functionalities of weapons. For those who don't know, I have both a background in competitive Tetris as well as Super Mario Sunshine speedrunning. So I think kind of naturally over the course of my playtime, I was sort of figuring out ideas and sort of synthesizing what good play would look like. I was already kind of breezing through the fights. It really was a question of how fast can I really go? And so eventually I kind of put my mind to it, and here we are. After about 15 hours of casual play and pretty much beating the whole game, I set to going with a first run through to try and figure out what I even want to get done in a speed run and what even needs to be done. The way the progression works is pretty simple. Usually, you just have one main event quest, and when you complete it, you unlock the next main event quest. By completing all of them, you eventually reach the final boss, whom you beat, and then the game is over. But let me get into the nitty gritty of my game plan coming out of my practice run through. After completing the prologue in Tiny Ruin, I would go to the north of New Riverstone to pick up 150 gold so that I could buy the Spiked Gauntlet. The reason I did that was to get a base boost to my attack for 20 attack, which the Spiked Gauntlets offer. No other gloves until later in the game offer an attack boost, so I thought this is worth picking up for the 5 seconds of overworld movement. In addition to the gauntlets, in Gone's Landing I would pick up the Rod of Wild Nature. The rod does fairly good damage for being a completely free weapon, just being found in the wild, and also has a nice special ability of doing plus 33% damage for every line cleared by a block that is 3 tiles or less. After this, I have to complete various construction projects for the villagers. Most importantly, the bridge, the warehouse, the campsite, the farm, the mine, and the bistro. To help out with this, I pick up 4 stone in Gone's Landing and 4 stone in Gusty Plains. But even so, stone is easily the most problematic resource because it's only an uncommon drop from Hagen's mining, and every building project requires some amount of stone, except for the farm. The way I handled mining segments was if I needed a resource, I would go to the mine and mine resources. Every time I would just check with a construction project to see if I had the stone to finish it, and if I didn't, I would just go back and mine more. After completing the various construction works and defeating Pirate Captain Krim, I'd be able to buy the Overflow Blade at the shop. This would be a nice upgrade to the Rod of Wild Nature and would really come in handy for some of the later fights. In addition, I could pick up my first different class, and the only different class, Budoka. Budoka is basically a class that allows your combo to be extended, and it also deals bonus damage with combos. Since combos are already generally the most effective way to deal damage, this class just buffing them to the max makes it a crazy build. It also has the added benefit of making the field less wide, going from 12 wide to 8 wide, meaning you can clear lines faster and deal more damage. With Budoka, I would go to Duke Dirtbeak. Duke Dirtbeak is a bit of an awkward fight, but I'll get into it a bit more later. The reason you have to fight Duke Dirtbeak is actually for another construction project, but the good news is that aside from getting the cup, you don't actually have to finish it. Instead, you can advance the story by talking to another NPC, which will start the Pirate Fire cutscene. After resolving the fire issue, you have to find a new place for the pirates to live, find a place for their lookout tower, and get the ice power-up. After that, you have a series of battles against various Byzantar Empire soldiers, as well as a monster guarding the Tangle Fig that you need to heal Sid. After all that, you can finally go to Captain Snell's boat and fight him. Before fighting him, you can actually pick up another weapon. This will depend on how much money you have. If you're too poor, you don't buy anything, and then after the fight, you buy the sharpened blade. If you have 2,500, you can buy the tile masher. If you have 3,000, you can buy the sharpened blade already. The reason money is inconsistent is because sometimes you can find money from treasure chests during Hagen's mining sections, but these are of course random. After this, it's a pretty straight shot through one more facility to get the electric power up, and then essentially going right to the final bosses. With all that explained, it's probably worth discussing the RNG or luck factors in the run. And honestly, at this point, the only thing I can identify is one big problem. To build all of the buildings we need to build, we need a lot of stone. And stone is an uncommon resource when mining with Hagen. Because of this, if Hagen just doesn't give us stone to mine, you can lose a ton of time. And by a ton, I mean every extra mining session with Hagen is 100 seconds. In an hour 15 run, or an hour 30 run, that's a lot of time. At this point in time, I didn't really have a good way of circumventing or mitigating the luck, but I did find some stuff later that would come in handy. That doesn't mean, though, that that's going to be the only RNG factor, and I'll find that out in a bit. Big question now is how's all this going to work in practice? My first day of runs was October 6th, and I would finish a 132 and a 126. Immediately, I had to implement a couple changes. First, I opted to pick up the Budoka class later into the run, because having it for the Duke Dirtfeet Beak fight actually makes it significantly more difficult. In that fight, managing your board state is crucial, because you need to clear heat crystals to damage Duke Dirtbeak. But the Budoka class also comes an awful plus piece, which makes it very difficult to reach the bottom of your board, especially when heat crystals are there, making the fight significantly more difficult and long. That wasn't the only change I made though. In fact, I had a bit of a laundry list of changes I wanted to make. First of all, picking up the 150 gold and then walking back down was slow. What I realized is that whenever I'm in New Riverstone, I can just exit to the map to leave the area. So I can activate the Tiny Ruins quest, run up to the house, grab the 150 gold, and then exit to the map, which is slightly faster and saves some overworld movement. Even more importantly, I realized that the Overflow Blade that I was buying after fighting the pirates was actually able to be bought before the pirates, allowing me to use it for 4 different fights that I hadn't used it on before, making them significantly faster. On top of that, instead of haphazardly mining whenever I needed to, what I decided to do was instead count how much stone I needed. On your third mining segment, you're able to purchase an extension. So what I would do is count how many stones I got in the first and second mining segments, and then know exactly how many stones I would need to buy in the third segment, and see if I would need an extension or not in the moment. To build all the requisite buildings, you need 50 total stone. You can find 4 stone in Gusty Plains, and you can also find 4 stone in Gone's Landing. You also grab 4 stone forcefully from a fire encounter that you need to do to blow up a wall to escape the Heatwave Coast facility. That being said, you need to get 38 stone from your mining segments. So it's important to keep track of that to know exactly how many extensions you need to buy. The reason buying an extension is good over doing another mining segment is that extensions are shorter, only lasting 30 seconds compared to a mining segment's 100, and also come with more resource drops, at the cost of only spending about 150 gold and a little bit upwards of that for future extensions. All of these changes are present in a 121 I would get a few days later. The 121 in question had a 4-2 Hagen mining. Let me explain what that means real quick. So 4 is the total number of segments that I need to complete the mining segments. Usually this will always be 4. I don't think there was a single run I completed that had a different number of those. That's because the first 2 segments you are unable to extend. The third segment you can extend and you get a ton of stone, and that's all the stone you're going to get. And the fourth segment is required to pick up sand and iron for the bistro. The number on the right represents how many extensions I had to perform to collect all the resources I need. If I needed to pay Hagen a little bit of money to have a 30 more seconds, that would be represented here. This number can vary all the way from 0 on some of the luckiest runs to 5 on the most unlucky. And recall, every single number is an extra 30 seconds. So the difference between a 4-1 and a 4-3 mining segment is a whole minute. After this run, I wanted to try a new idea with the mining. My plan was to collect some extra wood early on in the run. This would allow me to build a warehouse without ever having to worry about wood, and hopefully being able to build it in only one mining segment. My thought was that this would allow me to use extensions already on my second mining session instead of my third. However, unfortunately that wasn't the case. What I discovered by doing this is that whether you can extend your mining depends on how many times you've mined in the past and not what state of the game you're in. While that idea didn't work, there were some other ones I started to implement. For one, I realized, hey, I exit to map after getting the 150 gold in early game, why don't I make use of that feature more? I started integrating exit to maps on talking to Pari when it comes to constructing the warehouse and talking to Hagen when it comes to building the mine. These save a little bit of time over some overworld movement. On top of that, I discovered a mechanic about skipping cutscenes. Whenever there's a black screen, you can hold the escape button, which skips the cutscenes, and skip them even before the next part of the cutscene begins. Even though it won't show the progress bar on cutscene skipping, as long as you hold escape, sometimes you'll just skip the first cutscene entirely or otherwise you'll see only a couple of frames of it before it skips. This comes in handy about 5 to 10 times throughout the run, and each time saves a couple of seconds, which does add up. Using these new tricks and just executing a bit better, I would complete a 120 and a 118, the first sub 120 in the game's history. After this run, I had a couple changes I wanted to make, but the most important one didn't come from me. After sharing my 118 in the Impact Gameworks Discord, one of the devs asked me a couple questions, most notably about the class I use. His first thought was, hey, Brigand is quite strong. Why do you use Budoka over that? And while I still think that Budoka is stronger than Brigand, what I didn't realize was that Brigand is actually available significantly earlier than Budoka, and was a significant upgrade over the basic class. I'd be able to use the Brigand class for 6 fights, including the entire segment with the pirates where you fight Krim, as well as Duke Dirtbeak. This fight is especially important, because earlier I said that you can't use Budoka against it because stack management is incredibly important. Brigand is a lot easier to build around, and the fire T-pieces that you get actually do damage through Duke Dirtbeak's Heat Crystal Shield, making the fight significantly less RNG dependent and very consistent compared to what it was before. If I had to guess, this change alone would save about 40 seconds. The other changes I would make would be minor in comparison. For one, in Heatwave Coast, I would pick up a drop of 3 iron, to hopefully prevent a percentage of extensions on the final mining segment. Sometimes you just don't get enough iron, and picking this 3 up made that segment a lot more consistent and likely to get enough iron. The other thing I would fix up is just when to do the mining segments. In the past, I'd always kind of reacted to how much of a resource I'd had, most importantly stone, and only go to mine when I had to. What I would do now is mine when it was convenient. Once on the way to Gon on the bridge, once right after talking to Pari near the warehouse, and once when activating the quests for the campsite and the farm. This was both faster and had the added benefit of making it so that in my splits I wouldn't lose crazy amounts of time here and there from doing minings at different times. With all these changes, I would manage to put together a very strong 1:16:07. This run is notable because it is the only run I've ever done where I haven't had to do a Hagen mining extension. Most of the run was executed fairly well too, the only big mistake being 2 deaths during the Snell split on the Bizenkurt trio. This trio is awful because of the inconsistency in their attacks, meaning sometimes you can just die and have little to no control over it. Editor's note, yeah, no, I actually didn't mention it before, so I'm glad I mentioned it here, but I'll elaborate a little bit. At this point in the game, a lot of the generic enemies have little skulls over their heads because you're not meant to be strong enough to face them. Mostly we can skip the generic enemies, but the Bizankar trio in the Snell split is just unskippable. You have to fight those pirates and save your friends. Because of this, this fight is an extreme late game killer, and probably the most annoying fight in the game. I finished the 116 on October 11th, only about 2 weeks after the game released. From there, improvements would be more difficult to come by. On October 15th, I would finish a 1:15:36, with significantly worse luck but a lot better execution, especially in the endgame. The day after, I would manage to cut 6 seconds, and 2 more days later, on October 18th, I would get a 1:14:48. The only real thing that I discovered between the 116 and the 114, other than just figuring out how to play better, is at the very start of the run. I've already mentioned how during black screen cutscenes you can hold escape and start skipping the next cutscene. What I didn't know is that's also possible at the very beginning of the game. However, if you hit escape too early, the pause menu comes up and you can't get rid of it for 4 battles in a row, leading to essentially an instant reset. But those 2 seconds would be a nice thing to pick up. I considered being satisfied for the time being with the 114, as it was getting a bit demotivating to play without any competition or new innovations. However, I decided to keep pushing and then came up with a 113:55, a run that ended up being incredibly lucky but really slowed down towards the end with some weaker execution. I was very glad to have broken the barrier, but I was also very disappointed in my execution. A bad Duke Dirtbeak, and especially the endgame, was quite weak. Finally, I ended up with my current best time, a 113:10, which had fairly weak luck overall, with a 4-3 Hagen mining segment and a death to the Bizankar trio. Aside from that though, the run was excellent. Some of my best combats performed were in this run, such as the best Duke Dirtbeak I've ever done and the best Cerule fight I've ever done. And for the time being, that's where the record stands, and that's what I will most likely be satisfied with unless someone comes along and tries to help out and build the game. This was a very interesting project for me. When doing any work with speedrunning in the past, there had at least been something to go off of. Maybe a video, maybe a different category, maybe a full community of resources. But it was very interesting being the only one putting forth ideas and coming up with new solutions. That being said, I think if this game is to move forward anymore, I'll need a couple more people who bring some ideas to the table. Ultimately, you can only go so far without a community. If this video is interesting to you, I've attached in the description a full video of my personal best with post commentary, analyzing the run and discussing what was good, where there's potential, and many other subjects. If you have questions for me, feel free to leave them in the comments. I will read them and answer them, probably. Depends on the question. That being said, thank you so much for watching.